Welcome to the TIPNG VoteCast. This is a podcast brought to you by Transparency International PNG, where we give you the news behind the news for those interested in the elections in Papua New Guinea. Today on this episode, I'm joined by a special guest with a lot of insight into the elections in Papua New Guinea. I'll allow our guest to introduce himself and tell us a bit about what he does.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So I speak here as a director of Transparency International and very much wearing my Papua New Guinea hat and certainly not my corporate hat. I'm a founding director of Transparency International and I maintain my keen interest in the board to mentor our staff and the young directors, and I believe I still got a contribution to make to the TI movement.
And thank you. We're joined by Mr. Richard Kassman. As introduced, is a director on the Transparency International Board and actually a founding director of the Transparency International movement in Papua New Guinea. Maybe I can ask, just in terms of your experience with TIPNG, what has kept you so long in the movement? What is it that invigorates your drive to be still part of the organization?
Okay. I'm fortunate to be able to think multi-generational. I have 4 children, I have 17 grandchildren and a great-grandson, so that forces me to think multi-generational. And I feel that I need to continue to contribute and keep a long, strong perspective on the decisions, and the influence I make influences my great-grandson and his children.
And speaking from this generational point of view and with the experience that you have, what do you think are Papua New Guineans' expectations of these forthcoming 2022 national general elections?
This is going to be Papua New Guinea's 11th election, and people of Papua New Guinea and our 47th year. So people of Papua New Guinea deserve to demand good elections, free, fair, and safe elections. They have every right to demand this. But this, having said that, I am really concerned as to where we are now. So between that correct expectation on our people, let's just start there. The Papua New Guineans deserve a better and a high standard of elections.
And you say that we're in a place where maybe you're a bit concerned. Would you say, are we in a better or worse state than we were maybe 5 years ago on the eve of the 2017 national general elections?
Interesting question. I think it's still early to judge. What I'm hearing and reading in the press, and then hearing from some of the feedback from various awareness campaigns, including ours for TIPNG, is disconcerting, I've got to say. However, I think we need to move towards the writs and the nominations and that phase. So I think we need to reserve our judgment. It's probably a bit too early to call. The signs are concerning, but it's a bit early to call at this stage.
And when you speak about signs, what are the indicators that someone would look at to be able to evaluate? Look, are we in the same place as we were in 2017, or is it worse? What are those indicators?
The first one is the electoral roll. This was an issue in 2017. This remains an issue now in 2022. And we're hearing more and more concerns being raised about our common roll. That's the first fundamental that the Electoral Commission and indeed the government have had 5 years to deal with since then. That's number one. The second sign, which is the key red light, is the stability within the Electoral Commission. I have a view that the Electoral Commissioner's appointment was rather late, and then I think what we're witnessing is consequential organization, or perhaps lack thereof, due to this very late nomination. And I'm reading in the press that some very important positions in head office remain outstanding, and that's critical because that's the Electoral Commissioner's team, plus some provincial manager appointments have not been confirmed. this is the team that has a massive responsibility to delivering elections. And this is concerning me as a commentator for many years.
And I guess those administrative indicators are perhaps the most important determinant in delivering the elections. But there's also maybe other aspects of societal participation in the elections. We read in the news, for instance, of a number of women candidates coming forward. Do we look at other maybe social indicators as well to better judge where we are?
Yeah, let me just, I can't help but emphasize the importance of those appointments, because these are the appointments of the Electoral Commissioner and his management team are well within the control of government. These are things we can control. A lot of the other aspects that impact on the success of elections are really difficult to control. And so I just want to emphasize that. Back to the indications of women candidates, I'm excited about that. I think we need to get behind that and to try and build some momentum about that. About the success, I think the race hasn't started. The race hasn't started yet. However, I think all of us as Papua New Guineans need to get behind the concept and indeed the principle that the Parliament of Papua New Guinea will only improve when we have a stronger gender balance. And I think it's so important that we really encourage our people to give strong consideration to women candidates in their various electorates. This is really important. And also for the political parties to pay a little bit more attention and serious attention to the success of women candidates.
Yes, and those political parties are also, I guess, in the mix in terms of indicators. Are there any particular things that one should watch out for in terms of political parties to determine whether, we're prepared for these elections?
Okay, I think I'm going to step back one with the integrity of political parties legislation, the OLIPAC legislation, and the limited preferential voting legislation. These were structures that Transparency International assisted and pushed in that legislation a couple of decades ago now, in fact closer to 20 years ago. TI pushed that because we wanted to see a more fairer conduct of elections. So the OLIPAC is centered around stronger political party system. I fear that has not matured sufficiently yet, and I contemplate that the Papua New Guinea population, our history has shown that we do not return 50% to 60% of sitting MPs. And I believe that political parties and the major parties understand that and are thinking about that. And the strategy, unfortunately, is that, okay, I'm going to nominate people under my party's flag, but if they don't make it back, I have a war chest to go and recruit new MPs that come and that win their seats. And in place of my candidate, for example, that may have lost his seat. So the swiftness in which they can make those changes is concerning, because that is not the principle behind a political party-based system. So the party loses those seats, and then they rescue themselves by enticing new candidates with no affiliation, no experience, to join their party. So it becomes very much that numbers game. And I think it's a process of maturity, and it's a process where, as we go forward, political parties need to take that process more seriously. So we've got a political party system in a Westminster system, and then we just, mipula wokim tasol. Whatever the result is, we'll just pull it together and then front up with the numbers. That's where it conflicts with the depth of that legislation. I mentioned the limited preferential voting, 1, 2, and 3. I think parties are getting a little bit better understanding of the 1, 2, and 3. The reason TI pushed up limited preferential voting is because we wanted to ensure that our people have the opportunity. There's pressure to give your number 1 vote, maybe to your tribesman. And then the number 2 vote goes to a preference. And the number 3 vote can have an impact. So we need to push our people to value those 3 votes. I think what we need to drive in these elections is your 2 and 3 votes are as important as your 1 vote. And so our people can give more attention to those preferences, because in some of the hotly contested seats, those 2s and the 3s will bring those candidates home, especially where there's very strong candidates in a particular electorate.
And would you say these are the kind of innovations one would expect to see once legislative reform has been introduced?
I think we've done the reforms, I think we need to be careful we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I believe that the responsibility and accountability needs to go to the political parties to really inculcate that within their party system and then educate their members. So you can see that the Pangu Party of today has a different leader to the Pangu Party of 2017. Indeed, that leader has moved to another party and has formed another party. So you've had 1 or 2 other parties where their leaders have remained constant. But the parties that are very strong, which are Pangu and potentially United Labour Party, there's been strong changes in those parties, including the ruling party. So I hope that if we have that loyalty towards those parties, then that can help to mature. I'd be reticent to recommend legislative changes when we haven't really worked the existing laws that we had or have at the moment.
And you're listening to the TIPNG VoteCast, a podcast about the elections in Papua New Guinea. This episode is about the standard of elections in Papua New Guinea, and I've been discussing with TIPNG founding director, Mr. Richard Kassman, about some of the indicators that one would look at in terms of the conduct of the forthcoming elections. But we've discussed a lot about the things that have happened in the past that have informed where we are. So it's, I think, opportune to also look at where we have been and what's the standard that we should be expecting. For TIPNG, we've often talked about the standard of a free, fair and safe elections. Free meaning that everyone's able to vote for who they want. Fair means that everyone has the ability to participate in the elections. And again, safety of the elections is paramount. But in your view and in your experience, when was the last time PNG had a truly free, fair and safe elections?
I'm going to disappoint the audience and say we haven't yet. And I think it's important to appreciate that when we've had our first set of elections, and then, as I said, we're now voting for the 11th Parliament as an independent country. And we've been working, and each election we try to understand some lessons learned and then to improve along the way. At the same time, this dynamism of Papua New Guinea politics is quite vibrant, and I say use that word politely. My concern is that we have the other intervening or intervention is social media, and the social media will continue to have a massive impact on the thought process of Papua New Guineans, and in the world of fake and untruth, this is going to have it play out very strongly in our 22 elections, and then political parties are being smart about spinning and using marketing tools which is emerging, and we shouldn't be surprised that they're using marketing tools to win the elections. So I think this is going to play a role in the elections now, and my concern is that we haven't answered some of those key issues, and I mentioned, for example, the common role. That was another one. Apart from the appointments, common role is in the control of the Electoral Commission. They haven't done that well at all, and we're hearing complaints and more complaints from MPs, and I expect more in this term of Parliament, when those MPs suddenly realise, because they've been doing some homework, that it's quite poor in their own electorates, and their personal future is at stake because of that. So we need to deal with things that are well within our control and do that well. And then we deal with all the other things that we have less control over. So those two are a concern of mine and on what I'm observing as well. We're focusing on ensuring that our security forces are well budgeted. That's important, but perhaps we're focusing too much on that. Perhaps it's more about the administration, because the use and the requirement for security forces is a consequence of maladministration. Mm-hmm. And we probably should be focusing more on tidying up that administration of the elections, and less on the elections, less on anticipating that we're going to have the inevitable writs against the Electoral Commission. So I think we're focusing on some of those negatives, which are equally important, but I just would have preferred that the Electoral Commission and the government focus on the administration of the election. I think if we put a lot more focus on that would be important. And we're going to feel that. We're going to feel the pain of that lack of focus on the administration. And having said that, the administration of an election in Papua New Guinea, where the technology is not crash hot, the connectivity is not good, so we have to have paper ballots. We have to mark our vote in biro, put them into a box, and then count them manually. So unlike other jurisdictions where connectivity has helped deal with that, we're a long way away. So we have to deal with that. At the same time, there's the term culture, I think, is loosely used, but we have clan voting, block voting. There's a difference, in my view, between clan voting and block voting. I think Papua New Guineans will be surprised that in other jurisdictions, like closer to home, like Australia, in Great Britain, and then in the US, there are generations of family that vote blue or red. So that's a form of clan voting. So they do that in other jurisdictions. That's not so bad as where in the process of block voting, we ensure we get that block voting by taking the ballots, a few of us in this room marking the ballots, and we're having a feast for 1,000 people outside, and they have sold their vote to us and our intention. That's the wrong part of this block voting, but it is common. It is commonly practiced. We know that. We have electoral observation teams that have observed that, and we as a country, after the elections, don't discuss that, because the depth of our population and the large number of MPs are elected, or a good number of MPs are elected from that block voting, where one has to question the legality of that process. So you are, and this is controversial, but I think it's important for Papua New Guineans to ask themselves that question, and I want to force Papua New Guineans to make this very serious evaluation. If I broke into this building and used all the equipment that are here for a good purpose, such as an election awareness campaign, and hit off with a very successful awareness campaign, is that still right? The fact that you and I broke into a location, just using that as an example. So what's important is it was an illegal act for us to break and enter, in spite of we had great intentions of an interview. So this is where I feel that we are very forgiving, but it's a principle. It's a principle that we lack, whereby we are aware of what the illegalities that go on, but because we're declared, then we go in and we form part of the group that forms government, and then we go in the week 1 of August and form government on the floor of Parliament, then all sins are forgiven. These are principles that we must confront as a nation. We must be open and honest and confront those issues. Because do I change? Because I've got a position of authority. I'm not sure one changes at that time. So these are things that we need to confront ourselves as we evolve in this process of democracy.
And I think that's a really interesting approach to thinking about the questions of whether we've had free, fair and safe elections in PNG, by really looking at those core issues, the digital challenges that we have as we have to navigate the modern world, but obviously those core issues of security, safety, freedom of thought, conscience in terms of voting, but also the reality of political culture in Papua New Guinea. You mentioned some of the things that we should be watching out for, and I think as we go towards the end of this episode, what are some of the red lines for you that you see that, look, if ever our listeners wake up and see this headline in the newspaper, you know that we've diverged from the path of democracy and we're no longer a democracy. What are those red lines for you?
Okay. I'm not going to avoid this question. I'll answer this question, but let me start by saying, in this chaos, and it's not an excuse, but in this chaotic situation that I've described, we have the ability to compartmentalize that in the psyche of Papua New Guineans. So we turn up at the camp, we formulate at the camp, we compartmentalize what's happened before, we now are members of Parliament, and then we'll form a government. And I think we then will go in and we'll take over government and have a proper process on the floor of Parliament and the election of a Prime Minister. I think we need to recognize that Papua New Guinea, at that point, the processes work. And not only do the processes work, but there is a deep understanding to protect those processes. So I think we need to we need to give ourselves a tick for that. And what I mentioned about compartmentalizing, that's an important discussion to be had. I think the red line is that just how many electorates, the comparison of, at the moment we've got 111 seats. The question that we need to be watching is how many of those seats were elected properly. That's the test. So if 90 came in illegally, then that'll be a really, really big concern for us, because that's a massive majority that know that perhaps it wasn't a legitimate election that they were finally declared. So, but it's hard to judge at that time. But it is a concern that I have. And then the other one is the number of deaths. I think the number of deaths, in Papua New Guinea, we tend to say yes, and we tend to expect deaths in our elections. And we look at it, I won't say nonchalantly, but it's not serious. So the number of deaths, we really need to reduce the number of deaths, election-related deaths.
And I think just for our listeners and viewers, I think in the 2017 elections, it was reported that we had around 204 election-related deaths in the country. That's almost a rate of 2 deaths per electorate.
Yeah. And this is concerning. And from that statistics that you just shared, I think people will be surprised now, because it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But these are the fundamentals that we as a people tend to be prepared to push under the carpet. And things aren't getting better. And we need to deal with those serious fundamentals so that we can start to do things better going forward. And we need to say, as you said, in the lessons learned, there are 10 elements that we must get right in the other 50 that we've got to look at. And then we prioritize those, and we work really hard to get that right in the next elections.
And when we look at this analysis of, I guess, things that could be done to deliver safe elections, which challenges are we not aware of that are just not being discussed in the public arena when it comes to elections? Is it within the political space, the economic space, social, technological? What are those hidden challenges apart from maladministration and maybe some of that issues about political leaders determining the rules of how political leaders govern themselves?
Yeah.
Those are maybe the ones that our listeners and viewers are aware of. But are there any of these hidden challenges that no one talks about?
Yeah. I think the undue influence of foreign influence, be it corporate or political, I think this is what we need to be concerned about. And then I feel that we need to be watching what's happening in the other side of the world as well, and other in regionally. But I think we need to be, we should not underestimate that undue influence from foreign powers, from foreign influences, that triads, for example. I'm concerned about the influence of triads and how that plays out. So these are some of the other things that we need to be careful about as well. And we need to discuss, having public discourse all the time, so that we understand that is a major issue.
I think we've probably gone through a lot of the doom and gloom in terms of this episode when we look at the standard of elections. I think for myself, it's really concerning to hear that we're on a path to democracy and we haven't had maybe the elections that our constitution aspires to and that we've committed ourselves to. But if we look at maybe some of the steps for improvement as we come towards the end of this episode, what would a responsible government be expected to do if they come into office in August for the next 5 years to make sure that where we are now is not the same place we are in 2027?
I think the simplest thing is that once we complete these elections, and as I said, we have a good process of that once our MPs are elected, we need to start working at the Electoral Commission from 2023 onwards. The common roll and all those other processes. That's all we need to, not all we need to do, but if we do that from 2023 to the next elections, we will improve considerably.
Excellent. And I think that's the deep fix that we need. It's a lot of work and it's difficult to do in the absence of reliable census data. But if we're serious about elections, then that's the action the government has to take. Is there any other agenda that you'd like to put on the new incoming government for elections? Any items off the menu that, look, if they're serious about elections, do this first?
I want to caution against changing legislation as a way to go forward or as a way to fix things. Don't. My strong ask is that we improve what we've got. And I just cannot emphasize that. Let's start working on this in 2023, and that's for a good 4+ years to work on before the next elections. Let's not complicate it.
Excellent. And to end off this episode of the podcast, I ask you a question that we ask all our guests. What inspires you to continue doing the work that you do within this space?
Yes, you are. I think I answered that earlier. That generation, my responsibility to my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandson, and the unborn children of my family, and my wider family. I really focus on trying to do everything in my power to leave a better world when I meet my demise, and long far away may that be. But I think that's important. We need to be responsible about what we do in our private life, in our business life, and in our involvement in things like Transparency International. It's about making sure that we're part of the journey of nation building.
And on that note, thank you so much, Mr. Richard Kassman, for joining us on the Transparency International Papua New Guinea VoteCast. This has been a podcast for those interested in elections in Papua New Guinea, brought to you by Transparency International with the PNG Oz partnership. Please like and follow us to find out more, and join us for the next episode of the VoteCast.